Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Deuteronomy. Today we're looking at Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 2 and 3. Now you recall we've said in the last couple of days that this section of Deuteronomy, which includes chapters 7 through 11, is Moses preparing the people to cross over and to take possession of the promised land. And in these two verses, he's going to remind them of how God provided for them during their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And the same God, Moses is saying, who provided for you, will also give you the promised land. So notice what he says. They are to remember in verses 2 and 3 of chapter 8. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years, to humble and test you, in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Now Moses reminded them that during those 40 years you wandered in the wilderness, a constant concern would have been, how can we feed ourselves? Here in the desert, here in this wilderness region, how will we feed ourselves and our children? God put you in that situation to test you. Will you trust me, he was saying? Will you trust that I can care for you? Will you trust that I can provide your food, your daily bread? And then, of course, God did provide. Every day there was the manna. Every day God fed them with the bread that came from heaven. It was true every morning. They would go out and collect the manna for that day. God provided it every day of the 40 years in the wilderness. Now you remember the one day they were not to collect the manna, of course, was the Sabbath day, because there's no work on that day. But on the day before, they would collect for 2 days. God provided the manna every day, and he taught them that he is a God who provides for his children. Now we know this verse well. We know it so well, mainly because Jesus quotes it in the New Testament. Remember the temptations in the wilderness. One of the temptations that Satan gave to Jesus was, you're hungry. Why don't you turn these stones into bread? And Jesus quoted from Deuteronomy chapter 8, the words of Moses, originally spoken to the Israelites. But Jesus quoted and said, you shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So Jesus was remembering this verse in Deuteronomy chapter 8 and using it to refute the temptation of Satan. Satan was saying, depend on yourself and your power to provide bread. Don't depend on God. Don't depend on the Father. But Jesus says the Father will provide our daily bread. And so he does for us. This is why we pray in the Lord's Prayer. Give us today our daily bread. We're asking God to provide for us what we need for the day, to provide the manna we need for today. God is able, and he does make daily provision for his children. And so as Moses is preparing the Israelites to go and take possession of the promised land, they're wondering, are we able to do it? Can we pull it off? That's in their mind. Moses says, the same God who fed you every day in the wilderness, he provided the manna every day. He will provide for you as you enter the promised land. He will give you what you need to take possession of his promise. And so God does. We can always trust. Every day God will provide for us. And whatever he asks of us to do, he will provide the enabling to accomplish it. Our God is a God who provides for his children. Now he puts us in those places where we've got to trust him. He wants us to see that he makes that provision. But he always provides the manna every day. Hope you join us tomorrow. We'll continue looking at this section as Moses prepares the people to enter the promised land. So join us next time for our 5-minute Bible study in the book of Deuteronomy.